Okay, so let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you all topped up on caffeine and sugar, and you're ready for what's about to come. So we're going to have our panel on open access and precarity in the academic landscape, learning from the experiences of authors and scholar-led publishers. Just a small piece of housekeeping. Immediately following this panel at 12:30, there's going to be an OASPA members and supporters meeting. You're welcome to stay for the meeting, even if you're not a member of OASPA. I'm informed that it's not confidential or anything like that. But equally, if you would like to take a quick break and have 30 minutes to yourself, then feel free, please, to leave in an orderly manner. And then at 1 o'clock, we will have our lunch. Okay, so without further ado then, myself and my good colleague Lucy Barnes from Open Book Publishers were really excited to be able to sort of curate, if that's the right word, such a strong panel proposal for this afternoon's OASPA conversations. I think this is an incredibly important topic for all of us as scholarly publishers, and we need to reflect on the way in which precarity relates to book publishing, and that's what we're going to hear more about from our three speakers. But we need to think particularly about the kind of short, medium and long-term futures for academic scholars themselves. What do their careers look like? How is the research process going to play out in a very rapidly changing landscape? Now, what the three of us will be saying today and talking about does focus to a large extent on the UK higher education context, because that is where we work and that is where we are based. It will obviously be of relevance to many of you here, but it's not. It's going to be slightly different with respect to other countries. Recently, the Office for Students in the UK reported that universities in England risk closure with 40% facing budget deficits by the end of this year. Now, this has been a long time coming, and it's a kind of political situation generated by successive UK governments who have not invested in higher education and haven't allowed the universities to raise tuition fees to the extent that they need to. In fact, there was a report on the BBC website just this morning that came out from many of the vice-chancellors in the UK who were saying that we need to urgently raise tuition fees right now in response to lower than hoped for or lower than anticipated international student recruitment. And so we very much are speaking from a context that is in crisis. These universities are the backbone of what it is that we actually do as academic publishers. So with all of the kind of bad news that's taking place, there is actually a certain amount of good news to be had and to be found within the UK as well. There is a new generation of open access diamond university presses, and perhaps we may come on to discussing this. This arises out of necessity, particularly in social sciences and humanities disciplines where we have fewer resources. But I would point your attention to an organisation called the Open Institutional Publishing Association, or OIPA, which was founded in September 2023 to connect and encourage a diverse range of small to medium-sized university presses and university-affiliated publishing operations. And so this includes presses such as Aberdeen University Press, Edinburgh Diamond, Goldsmiths Press. It also includes the Open Library of Humanities, which is where I work, and the Scottish University Press, UCL Press, and so on. So we're speaking here from a kind of a time of upheaval, but also creativity, innovation, solidarity, collaboration. So let me introduce our speakers for today. I'm very excited to be joined by Professor Jo Deville over here on my right from Lancaster University and the Open Book Collective. Jo is a professor of science and technology studies at Lancaster University, and he's also the managing director of Open Book Collective. So he's based jointly in the Department of Sociology and the Management School, as well as being a director of the Centre for Science Studies. You may know Jo because he's leading the COPIM Open Access Books project, Futures project, sorry, there are a lot of terms. It's really hard to keep up with them. COPIM Open Book Futures project. And the project is developing a fairer, more sustainable and more diverse ecosystem for the production, funding and preservation of open access books. As well as all of that, he's the co-founder and co-editor of Mattering Press, which is also a Diamond OA book publisher and a charity registered in the UK. Further to my right, I'm joined by Dr. Noni Dube. Noni is an assistant professor in operations management at Lancaster University Management School. She is co-founder of the Southern Women Academics Network, or SWAN, which seeks to make academia a viable career choice for women of and from the Global South. SWAN works to inspire and empower girls and women from all walks of life, and to realize this, it is invested in building a knowledge base on the nature of challenges, blind spots, and missed opportunities in the academic landscape. And also, Noni has an interesting background, I understand, in operations and supply chain management, which possibly is being very useful in her current role. And then finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith Fathallah from Lancaster University, Coventry University, and the Open Book Collective. So Judith is one of the developers at the Open Book Collective, OBC, and she now works on research and outreach connected to the project, including the design and administration of the Collective Development Fund, which involves working with international stakeholders. Judith has a background in media studies, and she published her first Born Open Access monograph last year with Media Studies Press, which sounds absolutely wonderful. It was titled Killer Fandom, Fan Studies, and the Celebrity Serial Killer. So, with what's going to happen now then is that our speakers are going to present for around 12 minutes each, and they'll have some slides. After that, we're going to kind of have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then we're going to invite all of you to participate in that conversation as well. So, Judith, over to you.
Thank you.
These on the lectern, I'm guessing.
Can we get the first slideshow up, please? Thank you.
Hello, thank you. So yes, my name is Judith Fathallah, and today I'm going to speak a little bit about my journey as a precarious scholar in terms of choosing open access for books and what that has meant for my career, and I think the implications regarding higher education and publishing choices for academics in the UK specifically, but also more broadly. So I think that in this time that we have addressed of transition into a more equitable and sustainable landscape for open access books, author choices and author agency is a neglected area of discussion. Whilst we as authors obviously don't hold all the power in this industry, we do have a role to play and a degree of agency in our publishing choices as we produce the content, the textbooks, and the academic work that comprises the industry's product. From my perspective and the perspective of people I've worked with, legacy publishing choices no longer produce the rewards that they did for earlier academic cohorts. I often say, if you like, that the implicit contract is broken in terms of what we have been led to imagine, perhaps from the time we were PhD students, and the way that our careers have played out and are playing out in this increasingly precarious landscape. More and more of us are tenuously employed. And therefore, I think that authors should be working with librarians to enable this transition, both in our publishing choices and in the choices of works that we choose to request and to assign to teach with, to create a more sustainable and equitable landscape. And I'd like to draw your attention to this study by the University and Colleges Union in the UK from 2021. This addressed job insecurity in universities. You'll note here that they found at the time of this study that a third of all academics working in the UK are employed on fixed-term contracts, including myself. And when you look at research-only staff, that actually rises to 68%, which I think is quite amazing. I found that quite a startling figure myself. The use of zero-hour contracts are still in place. And we can see in terms of casualization that this affects staff from ethnic minorities and women especially, with regard to the distribution of those posts. They didn't look at how that is reflected in terms of career stage, but I would imagine that it is tilted more towards people at an earlier stage of their career. This report was updated in 2023. So we can see, as I've highlighted here, there was no reduction in the unacceptable levels of casualization, no changes in the disparity between men and women and ethnic minority staff, and also, quite alarmingly, the percentage of disabled staff on fixed-term and hourly pay contracts have also increased. Obviously, the implication of this for equity, as we were discussing earlier, are quite significant. So in terms of my journey specifically with book publishing, since the completion of my PhD, I have published 3 books. I'm still precariously employed. The first one, 2017, Amsterdam University Press, was made open access by Nonhlanhla. I had nothing to do with that process. I was not even aware of it until the book became available to search OA. Nobody told me about it. The second book, 2020, Iowa University Press, had no OA edition, and my most recent book by Media Studies Press was published Diamond OA last year. You can probably see that I am a scholar of fan studies, and perhaps that my topics that I've chosen to look into have become less unorthodox as time has gone on. I'll say a word on that a bit later. Why did I choose open access? Well, and Media Studies Press specifically, a small scholar-led press that is a member of the Open Book Collective. Well, the work that I've done with Open Book Collective has, of course, convinced me of the ethical necessity and the importance of disrupting the scholarly publishing landscape and of open access without book processing charge specifically. Also, from my sort of more self-interested perspective as an author, the citation advantage certainly seems to have worked for me. I checked those figures just yesterday, and they've both gone up a little bit. So the top one, fanfiction and the author, has gone up to 135 citations. Emo has gone up to 21. So the interesting thing there is that the ratio is staying the same, even though the citations are gradually rising. It's a ratio of, what is that, about 1 to 6? I'm not very good at maths, something like that. And the impact of choosing Media Studies Press, which I'll say more about in a second, for Killer Fandom, is too early to judge on citations. It only came out at the end of last year, but I have seen a lot more press, student, and broader interest of the book. I've done 2 book launches. I've had an interview with New Books Network. It was assigned reading at a university in America. Part of that might be the fact that true crime is very topical at the moment, and it's perhaps a slightly fashionable and intriguing subject. I actually think that if you read the book, it's rather less provocative than it sounds from the title. It's about situating the phenomenon of serial killer fandom within a broader understanding of the media industries and arguing that this isn't a pathology, it's a product of a broader industry in which we are all implicated as consumers of true crime and producers. The implicit contract of prestige publishing, as I said, is broken anyway. I have seen no rewards for my friends and colleagues who have gone with Taylor and Francis or Elsevier or the traditional routes. Going with university publishers only worked for me until my book became open access, knowledge enlarged, and then the citations went right up. My book that is traditionally published with a closed access university press, which I think is a better book, is not, in my opinion, getting the attention and promotion that it could be. This is why Lucy and I wrote a blog on LSE regarding the need for a more plural perspective of smaller scholar-led publishers for open access book. Media Studies Press is an innovative publisher. They were more willing to take perhaps a risk with me in publishing a title that at first glance seems quite unorthodox and provocative. I had some reservations about the pitch. It turns out they were extremely enthusiastic, extremely supportive, were with me at every stage of the production process. I had much more input into that. I was kept much more informed. And I think that both the print copy and the online copy look fantastic. They're beautifully produced. The images are in color. It looks absolutely every bit as professional as any other book that I have worked with. The peer review process was excellent. And all of this is sort of evidenced by the fact that at this time, Media Studies Press was coming on board the OBC as a member, was going through our membership vetting process, and therefore meeting the standards of peer review and production values and ethics and sustainability that we have for all of our members. So in conclusion, I think that there are variable, high quality and sustainable options for OA book publishing without book processing charges. This is what the Open Book Collective does. It enables publishers to move away from BPCs, and Joe will be talking more about that just in a second. Media Studies Press does not charge BPCs to authors. They did ask if I had any support from my university available, but which I think we did have a small sum, but publication was in no way dependent on that. The contract was already signed. And that if we as authors believe in a transition to equitable and sustainable OA, we need to exercise our power of choice regarding whom we choose to publish with and how we choose to publish. The citation advantage and openness of our work is probably more beneficial anyway than the quote-unquote prestige of legacy publishers, which don't result in permanent contracts. And anyway, if I look at the people that I did my PhD with, I think of a cohort of 10 to 12, one has a permanent contract, one. And that is from the School of Media, Journalism and Cultural Studies at Cardiff University, which is arguably the top school in the UK for that subject. Authors need to work with librarians to ensure that library budgets are going to the right publishers, the publishers that we want to support, the publishers that we want to work with towards an OA future that we believe in which authors also are a key stakeholder. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Judith. Noni is up next.
Thank you. I suppose you can hear me. I realize I'm not the tallest of people. So if we adjust that, we're going to lose 5 minutes because Joe has to adjust it back. So, yes, you can call me Noni. I've given up on trying to teach people how to say Nonhlanhla. And I am here mostly as a representative of the Southern Women Academics Network. In terms of my own life as a researcher, I have to say, after hearing all the things I've heard in the last day and a half, And what I have seen, I think I have had an incredibly privileged academic life. So I will not make this talk about me because the types of problems that people describe I have not experienced. But the problems that I want to bring your attention to are the problems of my people, Global South scholars who have chosen to stay home or couldn't leave home and are trying to make it work under precarious conditions. So the stuff that we... Oh, sorry.
Wrong slides. So can we get there? That's the wrong slide deck. That's my slide deck.
Do I have to keep going? Did I go last?
No, don't show all my slides. Don't show. Yeah. Spoiler alert. Okay. That's right. I think they're sorting at the back. Is that true?
Okay, this
It's
is
not
the
a-
end of it.
If you just wait a second, I think they're sorting it. Please bear with us. We will return to normal service in a second.
Okay. All right, I'm just going to abandon that. Let's just forget about that.
No. I think they're just sorting it at the back there.
Yeah.
Just wait 1 sec.
I feel awkward just standing here.
I'm sure there's a precarity joke we can use. Precariousness of PowerPoint delivery.
This is your chance to talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I could, but I think they've now. It's gone now from our screen, so I think.
Is it? All right, let's see if something magical happened. Not yet.
Ah, there we go. I think it's coming.
All right.
Shall I go next? I'll go next, and then we can hopefully find Noni's slides.
See, good thing I didn't adjust the mic.
Yeah,
Here you go.
that's true.
Okay. So, sorry, Noni.
That's all right.
Oh, I need my notes.
We're matching form with content on this panel.
I wasn't ready for that. Okay, bear with me. So what I'm going to do, anticipating Noni, so you're just going to have to sort of wait for Noni. So now we're really building the suspense for the third talk. So what I'm going to be doing is offering a perspective as a publisher. So yesterday I presented on behalf of the COPIM community in my lightning talk, and I'm going to try and not speak as rapidly, and it's quite such a lightning fashion. But today I'm going to be talking on behalf of one member of that community. So, and that is Mattering Press, that was mentioned in one of the in Caroline's introduction. So, Mattering Press was launched just over 10 years ago, and is a diamond open access publisher that publishes books in and around the fields of science and technology studies. And for those of you that don't know what science and technology studies is, so one way to think of that is as a kind of subfield of sociology, which has a particular interest in thinking critically about the way in which expert knowledge circulates, so expert knowledge of all different kinds, science, but also other kinds, started off as science and then got broader. And that includes also looking at some of the social and also material infrastructures, including digital infrastructures, that facilitate the circulation of that knowledge. So hopefully you can see how that then connects to my interest in open access, open infrastructures, and so on, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the circulation of expert knowledge, where the money flows around that, where the sticking points are, and where the inequalities are perhaps generated. As some of our books, obviously all open access and all printed as hard copies as well. There's some more books as well. And we're a really tiny publisher. So we publish, I always say, between 1 and 5 books per year. And it's, that means we don't really have a fixed schedule. The books come out when they're ready. So it means sometimes we're frantically putting multiple books out, and sometimes it's a bit quiet, which I think is a bit better for the authors, although sometimes they do need a little bit of hurrying along. So we're a small publisher, but we still have managed to secure some of the kind of indicators of prestige that Judith was sort of alluding to then, that sometimes we might think of as the domain of larger publishers. So this is us at one of the biggest conferences in our particular fields. This is a conference in Amsterdam, happened a couple of months ago. And one of our books, Democratic Situations, won a pretty prestigious award, the Chris Freeman Award, which was, I think, really an important moment for us as the press. And there we are all, there's my colleague Endre, holding up the book aloft in celebration. We've also published books by some of the largest kind of names, some significant figures in our field. So, by some measures, Mattering Press has achieved a degree of success. But from the very beginning of our work, beneath this kind of gloss, of course, well, not of course, but there certainly was and is precarity. And I'm talking about precarity in 2 different dimensions. So precarity experienced by some members of our volunteer team. So we have a volunteer team of 7 editors, including myself. And also the kind of wider precarity of the press itself. My colleague and co-editor, Julian McHardy, who is the one at the back there holding his arms up aloft, wrote about this a few years ago. And I came across this article when I was thinking about this panel, because you know how it is. You send a panel abstract in, and then you think, oh, God, I've got to actually say something now. And it turns out my colleague Julian has said everything that I wanted to say, kind of anyway. But so this really interesting article, Like Cream, Valuing the Invaluable. So yesterday we heard Catherine Mitchell talking about the dangers of, I think this is completely correct point, to be clear, the dangers of diamond open access initiatives relying on kind of labours of love to sustain their work. But actually, back in 2017, when Julian was writing this article and was talking about what our business model was, he said, oh, actually, it is that. It is a labour of love. For our field, collegiate, and so on, interpret it as you like. And that this model is precarious, productive, certainly, but scary, unpredictable, and high stakes. Now, I suppose there was more to the business model than just that. So from a very early stage, we decided that we were only going to do this press if we could find a way to pay skilled professionals to do at least some of the production work that we had no knowledge about how to do. So principally copy editing, typesetting, proofreading. And we managed to do this by charging a book processing charge, an optional book processing charge. So a bit like MediaSlides.press, we don't make publishing decisions based on availability of funds, but we do on our site state that as a fee. And that's a fee of £6,000, although we do say that we can and often do discount this by up to 100%. Now, those who were paying attention yesterday when I gave my poster presentation will remember that I said that I was arguing against book processing charges and arguing that book processing charges are fundamentally inequitable, and they are indeed, even though our fee is probably about half the rate that will be charged by some large publishers. But at that stage of the game, when we started up, that was pretty much the only game in town for us anyway. But these fees, anyway, didn't solve our precarity, either as individual editors or as members of the press. So some of our editorial team do have tenured jobs, but some do not. 2 of our editors have left, at least institutionalized, academia altogether, even as they continue to work on the press. I think I missed a bit. Yeah, I'll get to that. Any revenues we were able to generate were nowhere near large enough or reliable enough to be able to pay for salaried positions at the press. So the press remained, and to some extent still remains, multiply precarious. But in the same article, Julian also observes that this, what he calls precarization, also needs to be understood in relation to the desire that we all felt when we set up the press to create a space for knowledge production that could sit outside the conventional logics of accountability that exist in so many university contexts. So in actual fact, he says, well, actually, precarization is kind of the price that we pay at Matching Press to escape accountability. So Precarity in Diamond Open Access Publishing is partially also produced by a university context that many of us feel a desire to at least sometimes escape from. And this context has a sometimes counterintuitive tendency to constrain what is thinkable and, when it comes to publishing, what is practically doable. So in preparing for this talk, again, sort of fumbling around what I was going to say, I thought, well, let's have a look at what some other scholar-led publishers have said about Precarity. And I went to a repository. We all love repositories, right? We've heard about repositories this morning. You're not going to come to an open access conference and not hear some talk about repositories, and they are fantastic. So it's the JISC repository in this case. And interview transcriptions, speaking about open data, I understand that qualitative disciplines sometimes have a skepticism about open data, but in this case, incredibly useful. My colleague Janneke Adima published a report in 2017, which is a landscape study of new university presses, and archived all the interview transcriptions, and that's a fantastic resource. And I went back to look at these transcriptions, and one that stood out to me was an interview from Eileen Joy from Punctum Books. Eileen is another COPIM collaborator. We've got Vincent here in the room as well, representing Punctum Books. Eileen notes that one of the things that Punctum was doing then, and again, we're in the same time period, around 2017, is publish things that are para-academic. So in one sense, one of the things that Punctum does is provide opportunities both for conversations that don't fit the conventional logics of the academy, and for people who either can't find their place within the academy, or more often are systematically excluded from it or rendered precarious by it. But more than that, Eileen also notes the surprise that she experienced in the early days of the press by the degree of support, both practical and intellectual, that Punctum was granted by colleagues and collaborators in the Para Academy. So scholar-led open access publishing sometimes exists in potentially complicated relationships with the logics of exclusion that higher education increasingly, it seems, tends to produce. But as we heard yesterday from Reggie, these logics of exclusion are not just local, but also global. To the extent that, as Reggie underscored, we can see how the open access movement has, in key respects, betrayed many parts of the world. So in this sense, precarity is produced not just through the kinds of employment conditions experienced by individual academics, nor just through the business models of individual publishers, but also on a global scale. But again, we find traces of in this case, Reggie and his colleague, describing logics that informed setting up, in this case, the African Platform for Open Scholarship, this time not in a repository, but in an open access journal article. And Reggie and his colleague write that there is talk about something that in a way provides a commonality to the logics informing the setting up of Matching Press and the setting up of Punctum. And this is a conviction that despite the precarity, despite the marginalization, there is value nonetheless in picking up our increasingly digital tools and actually building something. So Reggie writes that, that's the betrayal, sorry, writes that UCT developed the platform to demonstrate how structures that perpetuate inequality and exclusionary practice can be dismantled. So it serves a practical purpose, but also serves a demonstrable purpose. Now, over the years, publishers like Punctum, alongside publishers like Open Book Publishers and a range of other initiatives, have launched really important diamond open access models. We've heard about them already. I won't repeat that. We also have Open Library of Humanities, involving securing funding from multiple universities. And that, for these initiatives, often has at least addressed a substantial part of that problem of precarity, at least financial precarity. But also, for a small press like Matching Press, seems kind of utterly out of reach. These kind of models depend on doing outreach, they depend on library networks, and we as a press were already way over capacity. There's no way we could have set up our own member initiative. And also, us going to a library saying, will you support a publisher that publishes between 1 and 5 books per year? I mean, the time that it's going to take them to just put that thing through the system is just not going to be worth it. Which is where, I suppose, the Open Book Collective comes in. And obviously, declaring an interest, I'm managing director of the Open Book Collective, so obviously bear that in mind. But what the Open Book Collective does is it aggregates offers from different publishers and makes them available to a library to support as a group. And you'll find Matching Press there in the scholar-led package, alongside Punctum Books, alongside Open Book Publishers, alongside mediastudies.press that Judith mentioned before. And you'll also find us in the Open Book Collective package, which includes everything in the Open Book Collective. And as I mentioned yesterday, the number of initiatives will soon be growing on the Open Book Collective. And you'll see there, this is in pounds, not euros, sorry, but the pricing, obviously it's tiered, up to £15,000 to support everything on the platform. At the moment, that will grow as initiatives are added and so on. But at the moment, that's the price of a single BPC, and you're sustaining the work, or commercial BPC, and you're sustaining the work of 12 different initiatives providing opportunities to publish books like Judith, and so on. So what does that mean for matching? My time is pretty much up. What does that mean for matching? Well, we still are a volunteer team. We have not magically solved the problem of precarity yet, because the Open Book Collective is in early days, but it has made a substantial difference. We have paid. We have an employee, Jennifer, my fantastic colleague, Jennifer. I mean, it's just amazing the difference it makes having somebody there to support the press. So it's a long way to go, I think, to get us fully out of precarity, but at least we have begun to build, through working collectively, one way of perhaps doing open access differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, Noni, take 2.
Hey, slides.
Thank you.
Woo!
Now I have to reorient myself. Let's see where we were. So yes, we are the Southern Women Academics Network. Since 2021, we've been trying to make academia a viable career choice for women of the Global South. And we were really not prepared for the sort of stuff that we've come up. I can't move these. So one of the things that we have realized that led to the establishment of SWAN is that we can cry about all the injustices that we face and the challenges that we face, or we can start trying to do something about it. Something, anyway. So there's a proverb in my language where we say, "Ithendele elihle ngelikhala ligijima." A beautiful guinea fowl is one that runs while it cries. So even though we have these types of crises, the only way we can make progress is to keep moving. So we move with heavy hearts, and I'm just going to walk you through some of the things that we face within the context of publishing. So women of the Global South, I think most of us, regardless of where we sit, the sort of contract that we have in terms of social responsibility versus academic demands is very, very different from what most other people face. So whenever I'm in spaces and we are women and we say, yes, women, we are being downtrodden, I'm like, no, you should experience life as a Southern woman and the sort of responsibilities that we're expected to fulfill. Even at work, we do the housework, essentially academic housework, we are the ones doing it. If the child goes sick, we are the ones who have to go. So we have a lot against us, and yet still we have a lot to give intellectually. So we try to find ways around that. And maybe I should also say, we don't complain. We love being aunties, we love being mummies, we love doing the things that come with that. So it's not necessarily to complain, but it's how we make that coexist with the realities and the demands of a world that doesn't recognize the unique attribute of being a Southern woman. So Lucy already said, we seek to inspire and empower. So we don't leave you holding on to inspiration, but we say, what are the concrete steps that we can take that are going to allow you to get somewhere on your journey? Sometimes it means writing together. So we host a lot of online writing sessions. Sometimes it means having vent and flex sessions where we just let off a bit of steam and then we write, because venting is not going to solve our problems, but we are consistently looking for ways that we can actually get things done. And we are trying to think about how can we access people from a younger age, because it's clear, the statistics are clear, girls outperform boys by a lot, all the way from primary school going up to our first or master's degrees. And then women start to disappear. So where are we losing them in the pipeline? What's causing these leaks? Why are we losing this intellectual value? And how can we be able to capture it a bit more? So this is what SWAN is preoccupied with. And we try to serve all women as long as you're of Global South or region, because as I said, it doesn't matter where you're sitting in the world. Your challenges are essentially going to be the same, sometimes even worse, because if you're in a context where it's not understood what your reality is like, it only just makes things worse. We have various nationalities. So when we first started out, we named ourselves the Southern African Women's Network. But because we had an online presence, we started attracting people from different parts of the world. And so now our network represents multiple continents and many more people than just in Southern Africa. We don't have an online presence, but I don't want to get into those details because there's a lot that we can talk about. So we realize now the value of networks, and we try to find the different types of people that we can work with. So I've met a few people here that can help us to understand how publishing works and why we struggle with certain things. So this was a really nice thing for us. And I just would like to, so these are some of the things that we do. We write a lot. The only way to climb the academic ladder is to write and publish. If you don't do that, then you don't count as an academic. Unfortunately, that's one of the legitimacy indicators, right? And then we try to work together and support each other. So whatever knowledge I've got that others don't have, I will share, because it's the only way that we can grow. My husband likes to say we are the ones we have been waiting for. No one's coming for us. We've realized this, so we're going to just start helping ourselves as best as we can. So we've done a lot of things. We've had seminars from people who help us, for example, to think about really the concrete things related to writing, to the imposter syndrome, the feelings of insecurity that a lot of us carry, especially after multiple rejections in publishing. We try to do things related to writing. When I had COVID brain fog last year, I did a fundraising concert. We raised over £1,000 that's going to help us to register as a legal entity, because right now we don't exist to a lot of people. So if they say we have money, can you send us your registration? And I'm like, we don't have registration, or then you're not legitimate, we can't work with you. So now we do have to legitimize ourselves, but we run into the problem that our government at the moment in Zimbabwe has paused the type of registration that will be ideal for our goals. So we are sitting and thinking, do we register under something that's going to make it harder for us to achieve our goals? Do we wait and see if something's going to happen? So while the people who want us to be legitimate, we understand their concerns, there's really not much that we can do. So to most people, we don't exist. But it's fine. We keep it moving. And so, yeah, we've done a lot. And this is the session that brought us together, where Judith and Joe came to talk about open access publishing and talk about the sort of challenges we face. And that's when we realized that we are in a whole different spectrum when it comes to this conversation about open access. I just would like to say, I think I heard someone yesterday say that we don't want your donations or your help. If you do donate to a charity once in a while, here's someone you can support. All the posters and flyers and all material SWAN, including our logo, this young man designed. He charges us only $10 for every poster, and we get a lot of compliments. So if you do want to do something nice without being charitable, just find this young man and give him work. He's gonna do the most amazing thing. He's the most professional person I've ever known. And this comes from someone who's tried to work with professionals on this side of the world. It failed. So here's somebody, please just take their details and please find me if you need to find them. But this is one way that you can make a real difference. So where to begin with open access publishing? I had a script and then I just got rid of it after all the things that I have heard in the last few days. So I think it's safe for me to say to you from the beginning, I'm the idiot in the room. I know nothing about open access. So whatever I say, forgive me for being the idiot that I am. I'm also going to say, also upfront, whatever I'm going to say, I suppose, is not a criticism of people's intentions, because clearly we have good people with good intentions, but it's going to be a reflection on the impact of some of the choices that are being made on the people who need this type of stuff the most. So don't take anything personally, just take time to hear me out, and we will see what we can discuss. So from the last 2 days, when I listen to what people are saying, I'm trying to avoid the light because it's blinding me and I can't find the right spot. So, sorry. So one of the things that I start to conclude, just listening to people talk about open access and the challenges that we face, is that it looks like we are not really grappling with the problem. I would ask people in this room, when we talk about open access, what's the problem really? Because I think what open access does is it's a band-aid solution to a symptom, to a problem that we haven't actually named yet. And that's why, I mean, I was hearing yesterday people working 20 years to get open access running, and it's still not quite working. This to me sounds ridiculous. How is this possible? So what really is the problem that we are grappling with that we need to address before open access can work? That's the first thing, just from an outsider who knows nothing about anything. And then I would also say, also listening to the conversations, and I understand this is the context where we came to discuss open access, but it sounds like we have decided that whatever the question, the answer is open access. So we are going to do whatever it takes to go towards open access, because that is the answer to every question that we have got. And maybe we need to think about it differently, and I will try to reflect on what I see in relation to that. So in the end, I think one of the things that I heard come back and forth throughout the conversations yesterday was the idea of inclusion and equity, and I will ask on whose terms, for what purpose, so what do we consider to be inclusion and equity? So all these things are things that my head is just spinning, I can't process them, so I'm going to leave them with you. Maybe you can do something with them. So my context is that I work as a supply chain researcher. I work in humanitarian supply chains, to be specific, and it's a very, very complex place to work. So if you understand what's happening with conflict now and all the things that we have got, climate related, you name it, these are the things that I look at. And one of the things that I look at when I look in this type of context is ask, what is the product? So in this context of open access, it sounds like the product is knowledge. And this knowledge is a public good. It's meant to do some good in the world. It should be easily accessible to anyone who would have the most remote interest in, even if it's Joe who is cleaning the floors somewhere, if they're interested, Joe should be able to access this knowledge. It's not premium access, it's a public good. But we actually use sort of systems that are meant to, well, they are commercial in interest and nature, right? So we use a commercial vehicle to try to deliver the good, which is nothing bad. I see enough of that in the humanitarian sector. So what is it that we're failing here to do to make this public good accessible, right? Then we also talk about resilience in my field. One of the things that we know helps resilience is diversity. So this is why, for me, it's confusing that all the conversation that I've heard so far is on convergence. How can we make things work the same? Because actually, when you think about even what inclusion is, it sounds like we have decided what is the good way to be, and inclusive is trying to get everyone to that good way of being. But when you kill the diversity, you're actually much, much more vulnerable than you otherwise would have been. So when I think about the African continent, no, we don't have a big bag of money, but we're very resourceful people. We're able to do a lot with very limited resources. We're able to go in the dangerous places that researchers are not willing to go. Where angels fear to tread, you will find us there. But because there are issues with legitimacy, whatever knowledge we generate is always lost, right? So right now, people are talking, for example, about, I have a few seconds left. I hope I can do it. So one of the things that we are talking about right now, for example, the biggest priority of the century, we have many of them, but this one is antimicrobial resistance. And we suddenly get billions poured into AMR to try and help solve the problem. I know people who have been doing this research for decades, we've just not seen it, right? And so what is happening now, we are going to send the Western researchers who know how to do proper research, and they're going to stumble into the upstream supply chain where the manufacturing happens. They have no knowledge of the networks, they don't know what happens, and they're going to start from scratch. Well, somebody is already sitting on valuable information that could save us decades worth of effort. And they have context, they understand much, much more than we do. So the legitimacy also becomes a problem that is standing in our own way. If we really understood how much in crisis we are as a people, as the world, I think we will be less casual about how we are thinking about these things. I think we will do what we think is hard work that is not particularly attractive because it needs to be done. It's already been done. But we are having some kind of crisis in terms of our models, which I'm going to get to in a different moment. Then also in my work, we talk a lot about exploitation, modern slavery, forced labor. I want to make sure that my chocolate bar is slave labor free, but I have no problem with my publication that is actually built on slave labor. My colleagues who work in these contexts usually will have on paper, one full-time equivalent, let's say, to teach, but they are teaching 1.5, 2 FTEs. This is what they're having to do. And then next to that, somehow they find private time to do research that no one pays for. It doesn't get compensated. And then they try to publish, and then they run into these types of problems. And then maybe some of the journals have been nice enough to say, we will give you a waiver, so it will get published, but it's not open access. And then they will make money off the back of that person who did this without any compensation. That to me sounds like exploitation, and I am trying to understand how we have come to accept it and normalize it and be casual about it and talk about how we can make profit on the publishing end when it's built off of slave labor, essentially, right? And maybe it's not slave labor because these people really care about what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting in the ridiculous hours that they do just to get work done. So if you need a moment, I needed to. So there's a lot that goes on. And I think in the end, then, if I think about what's the crisis really when we are talking about open access and the issues that are there. So from the context that I just gave you, it looks like we have a crisis in our structures, whether it's the infrastructure that we have built for publishing, whether it's the mental models that we have about how the world works, because that doesn't fit the reality of the context of the Southern women that I work with. And many other Southern scholars who are not women, they could be something else, But every day they do a labor of love, and every day they face this frustration, and every day they have to find workarounds to the systems that we have built. I saw an article this morning. I'm sorry, I'm going to just try to wrap it up. I saw an article this morning where I think it's Taylor and Francis. If there's anyone from Taylor and Francis, please forgive me. It's nothing personal. But they have reached yet another agreement with some key South African universities for open access publishing. And it's being hailed as a great development, but let me tell you what happens in this situation. My colleague, let's say, sitting in Zimbabwe, in a Zimbabwean institution that has not paid for this, is thinking, I have important work that I would like to publish. Now, this university says to my colleague, if you would have a visiting scholar status with us, and every time you publish, you include us in the affiliation, then it's fine. You can publish that way. So my colleague is going to seek affiliation with this university, and they're not getting paid, by the way. They're just trying to get this valuable knowledge out, and then they're going to do it. But then their peers who are sitting in South Africa and probably for whatever reasons are not as productive are going to start having problems with my colleague who's done it. I'm talking from a real life scenario, something that has happened. So after a few publications, they get kicked out without any real explanation, right? So what it has done is actually increase the disparities that we see within these contexts. It has created more friction than solving problems because it's actually creating exclusivity within an environment of precarity. And whenever that happens, we know that it doesn't end well. So we really have to start thinking about what really are we trying to do. And if I will then leave you with something to think about, then I'm going to go. But I think one of the main things for me is that you need to decouple legitimacy from the current structures that we've got of publishing, of doing whatever it is that we are doing, right? Because right now, the legitimacy, because it is tightly linked to who the publisher is, who the agency is. On the ground, actually, the legitimate organizations or structures do nothing. The non-legitimate ones do all the legitimate work, but they will never get credit for it because they can't be recognized, right? So SWAN doesn't exist to most people because we don't have the papers to show it, we don't have the partnerships, but we're doing the important work. And we are just one small example out of a sea of many. If you just took the time, a couple of months, go to these contexts, you will find dozens of organizations like this. So who defines legitimacy? What are the alternative ways we can think about it? That's decoupled from these structures because we need them. But right now, this marriage is actually causing a lot of havoc. It's causing more harm than good. So I think when you go home, just ask yourself, yes, we are so passionate about open access. I wouldn't disagree about this merit, but just first of all, ask yourself, what is this really about? What is really the issue that we're trying to grapple with? That manifests as the symptom of what we are trying to solve with open access, the band-aid solution that we have for the systemic issue that we haven't asked ourselves about. And then ask yourself, how have I been part of the problem? What have I been doing, whether knowingly or not, that has contributed to this problem? And then third, if you really want to make a change, then ask yourself, what am I willing to give up or sacrifice to make this right? And then finally, what's going to take its place?
Thank you, Noni. That was a really powerful set of questions to open up our discussion. I think the thing that really hit me, you said it, Noni, but it came across in all the talks, was the phrase, no one's coming for us. In all of these precarious fields and disciplines and setting up new publishers, no one is going to help us. Other publishers aren't going to help us. Perhaps librarians aren't necessarily going to help us. We have to do it for ourselves. Perhaps I could come to you first, Judith, because you ended your presentation by talking about and enjoining authors to work with librarians to ensure that library budgets are going to support the right publishers. So I've got two questions. Who are, in your opinion, the right publishers, and how might that conversation and advocacy work begin?
Wow. Of course, the right publisher is going to be, to an extent, contextual, because it's going to depend on, one, there's the perspective that I would speak from as a developer of the Open Book Collective, as in supporting publishers that practice sustainable publishing, that I'm looking either not charging BBCs or moving away from BBCs, that have ways of working that are ethical, that are equitable, that are well governed, and that have high standards of publication. You also have to sort of look at it pragmatically from an author perspective. What are the publishers in my field that I need to be working with, that I need to be teaching with? And from the perspective of the institution, there is sort of the necessity of meeting the needs of the library's patrons in terms of what information people need access to for research and teaching. So there's an idealist strand to this, there's a pragmatic strand to this, and ultimately it does have to be decided in negotiations between the individuals in specific institutional context. But right now, I feel that authors are barely even taking part in this conversation. I mean, the level of understanding of open access publishers amongst authors in the UK is poor. I have people much, much more senior than me contact me on Twitter and say things like, OA won't work because BPC is too high. I know BBC is too high. There are other ways of doing it, but they think that's it. They think OA is you pay a fee and your book gets made OA and the fee is £13,000. So the first thing is that authors need to diversify their understanding and elevate their understanding. I did apply for funding to try and set up an author network for education and support, but I didn't get it. So there we go. I still like to do that in the future. If anybody knows any good funding opportunities for that, let me know. So the first stage is for authors to become better involved in the conversation, to better educate themselves, to better understand about the different kinds of OA publishing, and then to work with their librarians to meet the needs of themselves and of their institution in better ways.
Thank you. And Joe, you were talking about creating space for knowledge production outside of institutional accountability. I mean, I think all of the presentations on this panel have questioned the systemic inequalities and inequities of higher education and its institutions. Could you perhaps say a little bit more about, I was really struck by that phrase, accountability. Tell us your reasoning behind
Yeah, I mean,
that
it's like a
phrase.
sort of double-edged sword in some respects. So in some, well, now I'm obviously working on a funded research project, so my university is now very happy with me because I have now fit into the logics of university accountability by providing a grant. However, for many years, Fluttering Press was the kind of hobby which, when you have your annual, performance review type discussion, oh, that's nice, but where are your journal articles? So it's escaping a logic of accountability in that the university really didn't care about, and not to disparage my university, I mean, almost every university in the UK would probably be similar. This kind of work that we might be doing, I mean, sometimes alongside our main jobs, is just not fit into those logics. So there's the kind of push factor in the sense that that's kind of, we were doing it despite that, I suppose. But I think there is also a kind of playful aspect to existing outside logics of accountability that is something that many scholar-led publishers really relish. So my colleague Julian is also involved in our project, the Experimental Publishing Group, and he and Janneke Adema and Rebecca Kieswetter and Simon Bowie and colleagues, are really experimenting with other scholar-led publishers about ways in which we can do publishing differently. And this is not in order to develop a ref impact case study, for those of you that might know what that is. This is not in order to increase your citation count. It's not in order to get promoted. It's just because it's really interesting and intellectually stimulating to do, and provides the possibility of assembling new communities around activities of knowledge production.
Yeah.
So it's that almost traditional and almost kind of, almost kind of increasingly ever decreasing, perhaps interest in academic work for its own sake, including the academic work of knowledge production, which has a very, very long history, but is not often seen as part of the daily business of the university.
I mean, it's a profound irony, don't you think, that academic research is the basis on which all of our business models are generated as scholarly publishers. And yet, as Judith very rightly points out, probably the only academics in this room are the four of us. Maybe there's a couple more out there, and certainly people who have an academic training and PhDs obviously do go into publishing careers. But the academics are not in control in any way, shape or form of the processes that determine their own career paths, whether there even is a career path available to them in the current precarious employment context. I'd like to hear all of your responses, perhaps starting with Noni, we need academics to be at that table, don't we, Noni? And you made that abundantly clear, particularly women from the global south. How do we force and create that space for ourselves? If no one is coming for us, how do we make our voices heard?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no. I mean, if I think about the conversation that we are having right now, in some way, it's not the academics' problem, right? The academics' problem within the ecosystem that we have created is to generate new knowledge that's going to be of value some way, right? This is what we do. So again, talking as a supply chain person, I'm thinking about, I can visualize a production line where different people are responsible for different parts of the process, right? So if I'm at the start of the process, I generate this knowledge, my work should be done. I should trust that the person that comes after me is going to do whatever is necessary, and the end product is going to have its intended effect and reach the intended people, and everyone gets a fair piece for the work that they have put in the process. But right now, the model is that the academic is being exploited in different ways, right? So, because even the expectations the universities are placing on us sitting here in this very privileged position mean that we're working long hours and into the weekends. That's no way to exist, right? Yes, we do have to have some kind of conversation because we need to take a holistic look at the situation. We have to think about what are the missed opportunities, what are the blind spots that we have got. But then after that, somebody has to take responsibility for it. And it's not us, because our main business is the knowledge generation. So what happens to the people who have to make sure this knowledge gets packaged properly and then gets disseminated in ways that it's going to reach the people that matter? And I think necessarily you're going to have to dismantle the current models, and you're going to have to make room for new ones, because the realities that you face in different sub-environments are very different. You can't impose the Western modern model of publishing on the Southern context for the reasons that I have described, and even more, right? So if that is the case, we have to accept that we are going to need multiple models that allow us to optimize the process for the different contextual realities that we face.
And that responsibility, does that need to be taken by a whole range of actors, including university management?
Yes. Especially the
hiring
ones we
committees?
have, oh, sorry.
Go.
Especially the ones we have been ignoring for a long time, because they are people who have been doing a lot of serious work, but it's not legitimate work because it doesn't belong in the structures that we consider to be legitimate. So maybe our first assignment is to go out and find all these people, because they have at least the bulk of the answers. Yeah. And then we try to work from there. But let's just forget whatever we know today about what we consider to be good publishing and responsible publishing and start from scratch.
Jay?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been sort of arguing off and on for some time now that actually I think that there is sometimes these conversations get separated from thinking about what the purpose of a university is. And I think really to get to the real bones of some of this issue, there is, alongside, the work that we're doing to kind of sometimes seems like, to fiddle around the margins, although I would hopefully that our work is a bit more than that, but it really has to go alongside of rethinking of what the purpose of a university is. And of course, you've already alluded to the UK context, and it seems hard to be doing that at a time when there's significant funding, constraints and so on. But really, the work that we're all doing in some ways is valid academic work. So as valid, in my view, as producing a fantastic paper on whatever your field of research is. So I think there is a case to be made to university management and so on that actually this work on publishing is not separate from the business of producing that knowledge, but is actually utterly entangled with it. And the problem is ultimately that we've been seeing these things as separate problems. Now, I'm not naive enough to suggest that it's going to be fixed overnight. I mean, it'd be great if I was in the UK and, all the university senior managers were there, but I'm sure they're too busy doing restructurings and things like that to be paying attention to what we are doing. But I mean, there are some people in the UK that are working at a senior level to address this. So I think just trying to support them in the work that we're doing, I think is an important thing that we can be doing.
Well, sort of, in a way, kind of piggybacking off what Joe said there, I would like to see, and maybe even do, to be ambitious, more academics seize the means of publication themselves. My book that I just wrote, Killer Fandom, worked because Jeff Pooley is a media and cultural studies academic. Jeff Pooley is the director of Media Studies Press. If I went to a lot of publishers and I said, I think there's a fan studies book to be written about the celebritization of serial killers and the fandom that developed around them, a lot of publishers would have said, what are you talking about? Jeff knew exactly what I was talking about, and he was in it 100% from the beginning. He loved it. He said, I think that is a huge perception of a gap there in that field, and let's do it. The way we're going to get those kind of challenging, innovative, high-quality ideas is for academics to do, and I don't mean business in an economic sense, although I guess I do as well, to do the business of publishing. That's how we're going to get interesting books. Otherwise, we're going to get the same books again and again that fit the predefined categories of legacy publisher series. And we've got enough. So, how to make university, as you say, how to make university management understand that the labor of publishing is, and the labor of librarianship, and the labor of distribution and infrastructure and metadata is academic labor. I'm not yet in the position where I can take that risk that I'm going to say, I will have nothing further to do with legacy publishing strategies and devote myself to learning how to make my own publication venue in which I will publish all my scholarship. Maybe one day I will be. I mean, some academics have effectively done that, haven't they? It's kind of what Eileen did. But that's the system that needs to be changed.
Absolutely. I mean, I would point you towards the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, COARA, for anyone who hasn't come across that, because they are working through the UK university senior management teams precisely in order to try and address some of these structural issues. I mean, we have a couple of minutes left, and I did want a final thought from the panel before I open up for a couple of questions. We've heard a lot about exploitation of academic volunteer labour. We've heard a lot about legacy publishers. We know that certain legacy publishers are trying to rebuild trust, perhaps, in their organisations. OASPA is a broad church. The members, we're all from various different sized organisations. Do you think there's anything that these kinds of commercial legacy publishers might do to help restore trust amongst academics who have provided them with all of this content for free for such a long time?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, I think, so someone asked in the previous panel a question about whether commercial publishers had something to contribute to this. And I think, so to be absolutely transparent, the Open Book Collective, we don't require that all our publishers are non-commercial. So we have a couple of commercial publishers. But I think what we find particularly troubling is the scale at which commerciality is operating. So, you know, White Horse Press, one of our presses, is founded as a company. They are barely surviving. They're not making vast profits. That is on multiple orders of magnitude different to the Relics Group, which is the parent company of Elsevier, that is making many millions in profit. So I think for us, the binary of commercial and non-commercial isn't probably the best place to start. It would be probably more about the question around monopolization and infrastructure consolidation. That, I think, is the challenge. So, yeah, if some of the large commercial companies were interested in opening up that conversation about splitting up into smaller entities and stopping their work of grabbing the kind of means of academic production, then I think that's where a conversation could start. But we've seen, unfortunately, the opposite in most cases, where certainly the larger commercial publishers, and again, a bit like Noni, you know, I know we have colleagues in this room who are doing fantastic work, and I don't mean to be attacking you personally, but it's these structural questions that we are troubled by, and that, you know, we are seeing do some damage in different contexts. We've heard it in local contexts and also in global contexts. So, yeah, if we were able to start a conversation around that, then I think there's potentially, you know, we could have. And there's a philosopher, Isabel Stengers, talks about the need for diplomacy, right? So I think there's always a space for diplomacy.
Yep.
But some of the terms at which that diplomacy might need to begin and are difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have one or two quick questions? I'm very conscious that tech issues have foreclosed much open debate. But is there anyone who would like to ask a question just now? Okay, well, if not, I think diplomacy is a really positive way to end. As you've heard from our speakers, the door is open. If anybody should like to restore trust with academics, we welcome those conversations to start. Please join me in thanking three really fabulous presentations. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to David Ross for the OASPA members and supporters meeting. But if you don't want to stay for that, you're welcome to join us back at 1 o'clock upstairs in the dining room for lunch. See you later. Thank you.